Hey Ben, this is a good one because I think this is on a lot of people's minds too. Because if we espouse that the percentage of the purchase price that you pay for any property that you buy ideally has a component of 60% or better for the land to the overall value of the purchase price that you're paying. But at a headline level, that's a great concept. But this is a really good question that we've got here from Bronwyn. How do I actually land that plane? What does that actually mean tactically when I'm trying to work it out?
Yeah, so there's a technical analysis that goes on as part of this particular story. And so there's a couple of ways in which you want to be looking at that. One is, you can start with a rates notice where you've got land value and then in the improvement on top of that land. And that's, to Bronwyn's point, that's basically telling us that actually it's a bit unders. And that's usually because valuations are done on a 2 or 3 year cycle in most municipalities, and that's basically why they have that lag effect. But if I can explain it to you in terms of how you attempt to do an estimate, because that's all that they are, the same way in which valuer generals use a methodology to estimate what land values are. The best way to do it is this. Just imagine yourself going into a suburb and starting to look at lots of different properties, all right? And then starting to think about them technically in terms of their value breakdown. And their value breakdown is land and then ultimately in the improvements on that land. So if you know the square meterage of the land and then you ultimately know what the ultimate selling price was and you know the square meterage of the property on top of that land, well, guess what? You can actually start doing some simple analysis. And you can start to say, what's the replacement value of the improvements, i.e. the property that was on there? So let's say you've got a 300 square metre house that was on that land, and you know roughly that 300 square metre house to build today, i.e. replacement value, is maybe 9,000 per square metre, as an example. So you can then work out, hypothetically, that's 270,000 if I've got my math correct, if that's right. Have I got my maths correct? I'm just trying to think quickly. I've still got brain fog from COVID. So if that's 300 square meters, 9,000, that's about 270,000, right? So if it's 270,000 is the replacement value of that. So you just subtract that off the ultimate value of what the property sold for, and then you'll get a rough idea of the land. And then you can start to calculate the land to asset ratio as part of that particular story. That's one way in which we would technically assess that land value. Now, what you've got to understand is there's different costs for different types of builds. So there's high-end build, there's medium builds, and then there's low budget builds. So once you work out those rough costs for replacement value, it's then a lot easier to work that out. Now, it's really easy. It's really easy if you're going out into new estate areas because you can drive around and see the vacant lots, and they're detecting and telling you pretty quickly what the land is worth. And then ultimately you go and see the new builders and they say, okay, we're going to drop a building on that worth X, and then you're going to work that out. And we've always talked about a really nice rule of thumb in getting the balance right is 60% in the land, 40% in the improvements if we're talking about a single freestanding dwelling, Bryce.
Yeah, so Bronwyn, I think the biggest hack that you can do is the older the property, the more likely that the land to asset ratio is in the favour that you're after. So think about if you have an apartment that's in a 1970s block, and that apartment has one of 18 in the block, versus, and you're paying, I don't know, let's just put 700,000 on it. Versus if you go and spend 700,000 on a new apartment, but that new apartment is one of 300 properties instead of one of 18. You can see that the percentage of the 700 that goes towards the actual improvement on top of the land would be higher than the 1970s one, because a lot of that replacement value is been depreciated, and because you're usually in better locations, the land values increase. So the hack here is the longer the property has been on the land, so think 30 plus years, the more likely the ratio is going to be in the favour that you want. Because what Ben was saying before is You could do it via the council rates, but ideally you want to do it through market value and having a bit of an understanding around what land is selling in the area. And to Ben's point, it's not that easy. And again, if you go out to the subdivisions and you see the price per square metre, the blocks are getting smaller so that people can still get into their budget with the house they want on it, right? So they're spending a lot for the house and little for the land. And obviously over time, they hope that get that density up, and that will improve the land value over time. But I think the important part here is if it gets a bit overwhelming or it gets a bit confusing, because there is some technical stuff you can do. You can put some calculations in, as Ben said, and find out the square metre for the land and the square metre for the new build, and then you plug those formulas in, and then you'll get a calculation that spits out. But the hack here is, and it's what we've been talking about for a long time, established properties, number one criteria. And the longer that the property has been in existence as an established property, the higher likelihood you are to be getting the land to asset value ratio in your favour, which is why one of the reasons why we have the view that brand new can't outperform established, because pound for pound, you're paying too much for the building versus paying too much for the land. And that's the important part here. So, Ben, there's a fair bit we covered there.
Yeah, beautifully said, that last bit, in terms of that's why new can never outperform old. I think we'll do some more work on that over time. Hey, for those people watching the video, we'll put a still up right now where there's a breakdown in terms of how those calculations work. I did get my calculation incorrect in the sense that I said 9,000 for the square metre build. That's 9,000 per square. So you actually need to break that down. Let's say that's 900, which is 270,000. Otherwise, I was talking about a $2.7 million build, which threw my numbers out. So apologies for that. But if you're looking at the screen, so watch our YouTube show if this is something that's really interesting for you from a technical point of view. We've got a still there that will basically show you, and I've broken down all of the conventions. And so if you want to be you want to do some really technical analysis, this is basically how you go about doing that. And so what we've talked about there is the market value assessment of the technical value and the inputs that are needed, and then ultimately how those calculations then work themselves out. So it's all in that still. So if you're watching this on video, you'll see that's very difficult to, obviously, for our audio viewers, but gives you a good reason to go and check out the YouTube.
Good chance to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Ben.
Good chance to subscribe to the YouTube channel. So play along with that. But that's how you do it. So Bronwyn, it is all very, you can't just do it on one. It's another little bit of advice. You want to basically build up a series of examples in a location, and that's going to get you roughly to where it needs to be. Now, each property is going to be different, to Bryce's point about the age of the dwelling. So the older the dwelling, the less value it's going to have in the improvements, and the more of that is going to flow through into the land. And that's why always older properties are pretty good from a land to asset ratio point of view, as everyone builds new around you. You sit on the really old property there and you're going to get an outperform result, because ultimately, your value is going to increase by all of this extra work that's going on, and this beautification that's going on in your street and your neighborhood. And you're sitting with this old, beautiful little reliable and durable, you might even call it an ugly duckling that's sitting there, and the land value is going up beautifully and you're getting a great return. And as long as it's, safe and comfortable for your tenant to be in that, you just keep sitting on that, and then one day you might turn it into a duplex and turn apple into apple pie. So that just gives you some idea of where, I'm really using my advisor hat now in terms of how we might talk to our staff and our clients in terms of educating them on that particular process. But that's it. That's how you do it. Start to build up a log of properties in those areas. And finally, I know I'm rambling a bit here, but talk to a local real estate agent. They will know roughly what the per square metre of land and roughly the per square metre of builds in there. If they're worth their salt, if they're really experienced and they know their market, they really, in some cases, I've even seen the really elite agents know per street basically what people pay per square metre of land. And that's the technical assessment they do. And they've just been doing it long enough to know that those land values move over time, and they adjust their quoting as you talk to them. So as you build rapport with those agents, they might start to give you a little bit of their technical knowledge and nous as well.
So let's summarise this, Ben. So I've got a friend around the corner who's not interested in investing in property at all, just wants to pay off the mortgage and that is it. And he says to me, Bryce, I'm not even in the slightest bit interested in valuations increasing. It's just not my thing, because all that means to me is the value of my land goes up and I've got to pay more rates. So I'm happy for the value of my property to stay neutral, not go anywhere, right? So that's council valuation, one side. That's how they create the amount of contribution that you make for rates. That's one side. The other side is genuine exchange between a willing buyer and a willing seller, which is the market value. So if you're trying to work this out, ideally you would use it through market value. The hack that we talked about is the longer the property's been in existence, the more likely you are going to get closer to the land to asset value ratio that you're after. And thirdly, Ben, for us, the idea of buying something that has more land is clearly the preference over something that has more land value is something that has preference than less, which is why we've said go for established as a fundamental flat rule over brand new, because we can mathematically prove that brand new cannot beat established just because of the proportion that is allotted to the land versus the improvement on the dwelling. So good question, Bronwyn. Hopefully that discussion's helped you with that. To Ben's point, go and check it out on the YouTube channel if you want to see that screenshot. It's really helpful.